Hey guys, Peter Franson here from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. At the end of June 2019, I had the rare opportunity to be a guest on a podcast hosted by one of my favorite video game content creators, Colin Moriarty. You might know Colin from his many years as a reviewer and editor at IGN. After that, he had some time at Kind of Funny, which he co-founded with Greg Miller and some other IGN co-workers. A couple years ago, Colin went out on his own, creating Colin's Last Stand, which is made up of numerous podcasts of interest to gamers. His most unique podcast, I think, is Fireside Chats. It's an eclectic interview podcast series where Colin sits down in person and chats with people from various walks of life, allowing them to kind of share their unique perspective on things. And a recurring topic of that show with various guests has been religion. Now, for years, Colin himself has been a professing atheist, though he grew up in a Catholic home. And as I've heard Colin touch on the topic of religion over the years in his various shows and things, I've often wondered if there might be a perspective on faith that he'd never been exposed to. And like many of his listeners, I'm sure I imagine, what it would be like to sit down in person with Colin and share my perspective with him. Well, that conversation has now been released for patrons of Colin's Last Stand, and it will go live to the public 1 week from today when I'm posting this video. In the meantime, I thought some of you guys might be interested in hearing from someone who has had this unique experience of chatting in person with Colin Moriarty, and how, I prepared to talk with him about some honestly very sensitive and polarizing issues, and what the experience was like just in general to share a room and a conversation with Colin. So this is the first of a two-part video series where I will share behind-the-scenes details about really the whole experience. In this first part, though, the clips are going to be taken from video journal entries specifically that talk about, and video journal entries that I should say I share with my patrons monthly at patreon.com/spiritbladeproductions. And in these particular journal entries this time, I'm going to share what it was like for me to prepare for this experience, which was honestly pretty stress-inducing for me at times. I'll also share what I remember about those first moments meeting Colin in person, getting settled into his apartment to record, all the way up to when he pushed that record button, at which point I will refer you to the Fireside Chats episode that I was on, which I will link to from this video, from below this video. Then on the day that that episode goes live to the public, I'll post a second video on this channel with more video journal entries sharing how I thought the interview went, including what topics I had prepared to discuss that we never got around to discussing. So I hope you enjoy. Okay, it's Monday, May 6th, 2019. I've got a number of different things on my mind. I've been reading a book that's been, I think, pretty good for me called Letting Go of Fear. And there's a good amount of it that just I don't think applies to me, but it's still been good to help me with some principles, some reflection that's been helpful, to work through some of my issues of worry. I've just generally been a worrier throughout my life, and I'm just wanting to really tackle that at this point in my life now. So that's been good. And kind of in relationship to that is a situation that I'm excited about, that I was initially very scared of and was losing sleep over, and haven't been for about the last week, which is good. And I think it's a result of some of the things that I've been learning about worry and fear and developing trust in God. And anyway, so there is a very prominent mainstream games media personality that is not a believer and has been outspoken about the fact that he's not a believer. He likes to talk with other people and guests on his podcast, and usually pulls those from his patrons, and I've been supporting him on a private patron account that has nothing to do with Spirit Blade Productions money. I just kind of like, since he had just recently said, I hope one day to come to faith. And then in the same podcast, he just said, if you're interested in being on the show, let me know. I almost never turn anyone down. And the thought had occurred to me a couple times before, like, gosh, should I put myself out there? That would be way outside of my comfort zone, because I am not gifted as an evangelist. I am wired to teach, but evangelism does not come naturally to me. I don't have a natural drive to it. And while I love apologetics, which is the, Christian apologetics, which is the defense of the Christian faith, I love them mostly for what they do for my own faith. I really am not motivated to read and stay up on apologetics for the sake of witnessing to non-believers, So the idea, but as I've listened to some of the conversations he's had with believers on his podcast, I've thought to myself, they're not really, they're missing something that's really key, I think, that should be said. And so I put myself out there, and he's very interested in having me on. I'm not sharing his name yet, because if this all falls through or whatever, I'll want to, maybe keep trying in the future. And just for various reasons, I don't want to mention his name yet until this thing is a locked-in thing. But anyway, I'm very excited at the possibility of this. I was very nervous about it last week, and it kept me up. I lost sleep, and I was exhausted one day last week, But in really praying about it and thinking about it and processing some of the things that I've been learning and processing through as I've been dealing with my own tendency toward worry and fear of the unknown, which is what this is as I think about it, I really came to a great place that lasted at least an entire afternoon, where my heart was totally in the right place, because there's a mix of things going on here in my feelings about this. One, I've really developed an affection for this guy over the years in watching him. It's as much affection as you can have for someone you've never met and you only know through the content they create, But I've developed a real affection for this guy. And that's really the best word I can use to describe it. A love for him, but I think affection, maybe more specifically. And so I really want to just love on this guy and meet him where he's at and talk about whatever he wants to talk about and wherever he's at. And, a conversation on his podcast would be more about interviewing me and my positions and me making a case for something, but just the chance to be in the same space with him and either on the air or off the air, just have some moments of connection with him and just love on this guy a bit, So that is definitely something I really want to do in all this. The fear involved is I don't want to screw this up, both because, and that's a mix of good and bad in my heart there. I don't want to mess it up because of in my flesh. I don't want to be embarrassed and made a fool of, for him to ask me a question that I can't answer and stuff. And I know what you're going to say. I'll come back to that. But there's that fear. And there's also the fear of I want to represent the gospel well. I want to represent the truth well. I think that's the good part of my fear and worry, is that I feel that weight and responsibility of that sobering burden, to bear the truth responsibly. But ultimately that's up to God. God is going to fend for himself, which he can do far better than I can do for him. Oh, what was the other thing I was going to say? When I said, I know what you're going to say. Oh, yeah. The idea that I'm afraid that I won't have the right answer or whatever. And as I've said on the various, live streams that I've done, as people have, asked me about this, as this topic has come up, you don't have to have the right answers. And that's something I need to remind myself as well. Peter, you don't have to have the answers. In fact, you ought to just go in, as you do with your live streams, with the attitude of, hey, I'll tell you what I can. I'm going to fall short. We're going to find my limits really quick. But what I'll at least try to do after sharing what I can is refer you to a resource that I think you can use to go take your investigation further, And that's something that I think I could definitely do, And just last night, he sent a message to me giving me his personal email before we'd been interacting on Patreon, and he gave me his personal email to continue this and basically hash out the details and lock in something over the next few weeks. And by lock in, that would be a topic. I said, well, basically, I'm a guy who, I run this ministry, Christian Geek Central. I've been doing it since 2006. I was a worship pastor for 2 years before that. But all of my life and all through that, I have been someone who doubts and questions my own belief and my faith, and even has doubts of the truth of my faith. I'm someone who frequently doubts that my faith, aspects of my faith, and even the truth of my faith in general, is in the mix at times. But paradoxically, I also firmly hold to my faith. I'm not sure where God is going to take me. I did, as I said, have that afternoon where my heart was in totally the right place, and it was just solely motivated by love for this guy, and all the other things just melted away into the background, But some of that worry and fear has come back. It's still so much better than it was at the beginning, even as things are solidifying and becoming more real and moving forward, So that's really encouraging to me to see that the Holy Spirit is using truth to do a work in my heart, and actually, even as this circumstance which was worrying me is becoming more real and more present, my fear of it, my worry about it is receding. And so that's really encouraging. That's really encouraging because my faith is so weak and often dependent upon my circumstances. And so I'm just really, really happy to see that this is an instance where, no, the circumstances are actually intensifying a little bit, and yet my feelings about my circumstances are far better than they were, when they were less intense. So that's really cool. Okay, it's Friday, June 21st, 2019. It's now like a week since E3, and it was nice to come back to this week and not have much to do at all. I purposefully tried to build my schedule so that it could be as light as possible the 2 weeks following E3, so that I could use as much time as I felt necessary to prepare for my interview with Colin Moriarty, which is a week from today at this point. And I'm feeling pretty good about it. I've had varying degrees of nervousness about this whole thing, and I think once I just kind of resolved that, I'm not going to present myself as an apologist, and I'm just going to rather share my own experience with doubt and share some of the resources that were helpful to me. I think that really helped a lot to just not. The problem is I'm so wired as a teacher. I'm so gratified from teaching. I really enjoy learning and sharing that with others, but my personal wiring does not make me well suited to teaching in a classroom setting. I don't think. I much prefer to heavily prepare something in advance and then just present what I have prepared, rather than kind of like a back and forth, because I'm just not a quick thinker, and might not, well, likely I would think would not be able to respond well to off the cuff, questions that I'm not prepared for. So going into it with this kind of approach, I think is just going to be a lot better for, my temperament and personality and strengths and weaknesses. So now I'm just going through, and I have a document that's basically starts with an outline of my personal timeline in terms of my faith and my doubt and the questions that I asked and struggled with at various points in my life, so that I can kind of walk through that. It's written, I first wrote it out as basically I would write almost a story, and now I'm going back and, as I knew I would, whittling that down into just an outline. So I'm I'm keeping two versions of this document, one that's the full version, so I can read that and be thinking about the kinds of things I'd like to cover, and then what I'll actually take in with me will just be the outline, so that I don't give into the temptation to just read something, you know, but to really try and have a conversation as much as I can, you know, and for it to be, you know, my own words in the moment. So that's what I'm going through right now, is going through and converting that whole story into an outline. And then the outline also contains basically key words or phrases that have below my outline a series of basically entries, you know. So there's an entry for the God's holiness, because I think that God's holiness might be something that will be valuable to explore in that conversation. Issues of hell and who ends up there. So I've got basically entries so that, you know, if there's something that he wants to talk about more, then I can, you know, flip to that and just have some notes in front of me, scripture verses that I might want to reference or something, you know. And that's, you know, so I'm basically going to have one sheet in front of me that's just like my outline on hopefully a single sided piece of paper. And then I'll have just a little packet. And I told him that my memory is terrible and that I'm going to be bringing notes with me if that's okay with him, and he seemed fine with that. So, but yeah, so I'll have basically a packet that I can, you know, flip through as we, you know, touch on different topics. And I think between that, just having a few basic notes to refer to, and then with each of those entries, this is also the key thing that really takes the any feeling of pressure or obligation off of me, you know, to have an answer for everything. For each topic, I've spent some time searching for a resource online that I can refer him and listeners to that really much more fully explores that. And most of them I'm actually pulling from reasonablefaith.org, specifically because if I can keep like hammering one website, it'll be easier for him or his listeners to remember one website. If I keep saying, you know, like, if you go to reasonablefaith.org and use the search term blah, blah, blah for that topic, you can find some great stuff. And, if you go to reasonablefaith.org and use the search term blah, blah, blah. So that common denominator of reasonablefaith.org, just saying that, you know, throughout our conversation, I don't think it'll be the only thing that I'll reference, but it might come pretty close. And depending on where the conversation goes, it might be, I don't know. But I think that not that you know, it's the end-all, be-all of all resources, but it's a really good one. It's got 10 years worth of content and articles that cover so many different topics related to people, Christians or non-Christians, that are questioning the Christian faith. So it's just a good one-stop resource. So, and so basically, you know, after just kind of giving a basic explanation of the kinds of responses that I found on various issues that were intellectually satisfying to me. If he has questions beyond that, I likely won't try to really, you know, defend the view, but would just refer him to the website and stick to the mode of more just telling my story than, you know, trying to defend every point. So I think that there could be a lot of value in that. Okay, it's Thursday, June 27th, 2019, and I just finished running through my, talking through the outline of my story that I'm going to share with Colin tomorrow evening, and my voice is a little fatigued. I ran through that and like all of my supplementary notes, talked through them all, practiced talking through them all, using the notes in front of me. I'm going to have the notes, but I just practiced talking through them all like twice yesterday, and my voice was all breathy, and, you know, and I'm not as bad off today, but my voice is definitely fatigued having talked through it, and so that's the last time I'm going to talk through it. I think I'm pooped now. I'm actually coming to my bedroom. I'm going to take a nap, which I did yesterday after running through it. I was just pooped at the end of it. There's just a lot of mental focus involved in, So but I feel comfortable now with presenting my thoughts in the way that I'm planning, and even comfort, I think, in being flexible if he wants to change up the format or something. And so I'm feeling good about it. And I've got my accountability or discipleship or whatever buddy coming over in a couple hours, and we're going to pray together about the trip. And I think I'm just going to be done, like, thinking about it and prepping for it now after I take my nap. I mean, I'll have to make dinner, and then I might just end work a little bit early and just relax and have a chill out evening. And I'm planning on, one of the things I did was record myself talking through all of my supplementary points, and I'm going to be able to listen to that while I drive tomorrow, in addition to just listening to a bunch of William Lane Craig all the way there. I think I'll just dunk myself repeatedly in reasonablefaith.org for about 6 hours of driving, or actually it'll work out to 7 or 8. And then I'll get there early enough that I'll have time to go to a McDonald's nearby or something and think through my notes. And so I'm feeling very good about, like, my level of preparation. And now, I just need to really take my mind to my compassion for and love for him, and just my desire for him to have the world and infinitely more through the riches of Christ. And I just want that for him. And I'm looking forward to having a good conversation, hopefully, with a content creator that I really like. And that'll be, just from a fan perspective, that'll be neat too. And so if I remember, don't hold me to this. If I remember, I'll try to make one more recording, like maybe just a few minutes before I go in for the interview from my car, but we'll see. Anyway, now I've got my steamer on, and I'm going to take a nap, and then make dinner, and then maybe play some Dragon Quest XI, and just chill out for the rest of the evening. Well, I totally forgot to record, I think, anything while I was on my trip. I just was distracted by my mental preparations and the moments that I thought I might record something right before, going in. I thought I would be able to park my car near where the interview was going to take place and just record a little journal entry before going in, but I ended up having to park blocks away from where Colin's apartment was at. That combined with all the thoughts that I had on my mind to prepare, and the time I spent talking to Holly on the phone, and praying beforehand, just put the idea of recording something like this totally off the radar. I thought, my attitude and feelings about it leading into it had, my worry had subsided pretty, almost completely. I mean, I was nervy leading up to it, but not worried, if that makes sense. Kind of like the nerviness that one would feel before going out and performing in a play that they feel very prepared for, but they're still nervy because there's just the unknown and who knows what's going to happen, and it's a very in-the-moment kind of experience. But I wasn't worried, and I'm just really grateful that God enabled me to be in that space. I think a lot of it had to do with my preparation. God certainly uses preparation, but I think it also was in large part due to the perspective, he had me in. I'm just going over the details in my mind of before I went in to do the interview. He came down and introduced himself and shook my hand. He brought his little dog Lola with, which was a nice little kind of icebreaker to have a cute little puppy that I could pet. It's very sweet. And we went up together, and I asked him a few questions about Lola, like how old she is, and mentioned that I grew up with little dogs, and asked him if Lola liked, what do you call it, how she did with strangers. She must be used to strangers and stuff. And he said that she loves it, and he brings her out every time with him to just kind of give her a chance to get out of the apartment a little bit. We got up to his apartment, and he offered me some water. I was still pretty nervous, and in retrospect, I noticed that his comfort level, I think, developed as well over time. So I don't know if he was reading my nervousness, or if that's just normally kind of like the mode he's in. That's just felt a little more formal. But throughout the course of the interview, there was, there was really a relaxation that took on in the room, and maintained even in the few minutes that we spoke afterward. But anyway, we went into his office, and he had me sit in the chair that normally Chris Reagan sits in to do the Sacred Symbols podcast. And he had like a couple of boom mics set up, and they're directional, so we had to find my positioning so that it would be right where it needed to be. And that was a little bit tricky because I didn't anticipate, that I would kind of have to be stuck in one seating position the whole time, but it ended up working out just fine. We didn't do a lot of talking beforehand because he likes to. I think he asked me if I was familiar with the show. I told him I watched, listened to about every third or every fourth one. There was a little bit of monkeying with the microphone we had to do for a little while to get that sorted out. He told me that he did look at reasonablefaith.org briefly after looking at our correspondence, but then decided that he didn't want to, dive into it at all, and just kind of let me educate him during the chat. And then I think soon after that, we just got into it, and he started recording, and we were good to go from there. Oh, one thing that he said that I really appreciated, he said, if after the recording you realize you said something that you wish you hadn't said, just let me know, he said, and I'll tell, I can't remember the name of his editor, or if you think of it later on, just email me before we publish it, and I'll let him know, and we can cut that out. He said, this isn't a gotcha show. And I so appreciated that. Colin is always gracious and kind with all of his guests, and with all the Christian guests he's had on. But he does push back, which is I think is appropriate for this type of content that he's creating. But that just knowing that he pushes back was intimidating to me, and knowing that I'm a slow thinker and that I might, who knows, I might say something stupid, and I think by the time I was there, I was kind of over those concerns. But getting ready to do the whole thing, one thing I realized early on that makes it so different from what I'm no stranger to podcasting. I've been podcasting since 2007. So I've been podcasting for over 12 years now. It'd be just over 12, maybe just under. I think July 7th was the first time I did a podcast, July 7th, 2007. So I've been doing, and I've interviewed people before. I've interviewed many authors and different types of people on my show before, but I've always been the one in the driver's seat. I've always been the one in control of the content. I've always been the one that gets the recorded product and decides what final version of that product airs. I was always in what? I was always in control. Control, which is, as you may have heard me comment before, I'm just kind of a control freak. I'm insecure, and so I like being in control. Anyway, hearing that from him, it was like at that point I didn't need that, but it was still so nice. It just said something to me about Colin. Just spoke very highly of him to me. So once we were settled in and he confirmed with me that I was ready, he hit the record button and we were off to the races. So be sure to check the link below to get that episode of Colin's Last Stand Fireside Chats. Remember, it's only live for Colin's patrons initially, but 1 week from the day this video goes up, everyone should be able to listen to the episode from that link below. And then on that same day, I hope you'll come back for part 2 of this series. I've got a lot to share about what that experience was like. I want to say a big thank you to Colin Moriarty for his willingness to trust me to come into his home and talk about these deeply personal issues with him. That's something that personally I would never do with someone I know as little as Colin knows me. So, Colin, thank you very much for your bravery and your openness in doing that. I hope you guys enjoy our conversation and then come back here soon for my reactions. Thanks. Bye. ChristianGeekCentral.com